Good afternoon, Council. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Is there any conflict of interest amongst council members here tonight? Seeing none, I need a motion for the adoption of the published agenda on this meeting. Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Bowman, all in favor? It's carried, and I guess we'll move right into the public presentations, and we got Nancy Neal here from Watson and Associate. So Nancy, if you want to walk us through this, go ahead. You're on the mic now.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am going to, I believe I've been given power to share my screen. So let me just do that and let me know that you can see the presentation that I have up. You can someone can let me know. Great, thank you, Councillor Bowman. I've got a thumbs up. Great, thanks. So we're just going to walk through the water and wastewater rate study and financial plan that has recently been undertaken with staff and give you the highlights. Not sure your preference. I'm happy either way to wait till the end till if there's any questions or stop along the way. Is there a preference of council on that?
Which way would you want to go here? Does it matter? Just let her proceed with her presentation. Can't see council. It's okay, council? Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
That's great. Then if you do have questions along the way, and we're going to wait till the end, if you can just maybe jot down what slide you have questions on so that at the end we can flip back to them if necessary, that'd be really helpful for me.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right. So the purpose of the study that we undertook was to look at your current and future water and wastewater needs for capital over the next 10 years, identify cost recovery options for that capital infrastructure, as well as estimate your future operating costs for both services over the next 10 years as well, and recalculate the water and wastewater rates, both the base charge that is fixed, as well as the volume charge that is charged based on a per cubic meter usage. So the rate study does include the full calculated updated rates for a 10-year forecast period. Just to give you a bit of a background with and I know you've heard this before, a lot of you, but since Walkerton, there has been a number of different pieces of legislation surrounding water and wastewater passed. The first,
Nancy,
yep.
Can you share your screen, please?
Oh, are you not seeing it?
No.
I'm sorry.
You.
Okay. Great. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So yeah, there has been a number of different pieces of legislation passed since the Walkerton crisis, which is now, almost 20 years. The Safe Drinking Water Act, the Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act, Regulation 45307 under the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the one that actually requires you to do a financial plan and submit that to the province to get your water licensing. The Clean Water Act and the Water Opportunities Act. As well, there's Municipal Infrastructure Strategy and most recently, the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act of 2015 is what is requiring municipalities to embrace full asset management of their of all their assets, including water and wastewater. So you have been moving along that process, and for the most part, water and wastewater has been fully embraced for asset management purposes, although you're coming up on your 5-year review, and there may be future refinements needed to that going forward. Your current rates right now for water, wards 1 and 2 are charged similar rates, and wards 3 and 4, with all 4 wards being charged the same base charge. So that fixed monthly charge, regardless of how much water you use, you're paying $19.69. And then the volume charge or consumption charge varies depending on which system you are. So for right now, wards 1 and 2 are paying $1.45 per cubic meter, and wards 3 and 4 are paying $1.63 per cubic meter. For wastewater, you have 3 different individual systems. So, and they all vary. Ward 1 pays $20.68 per month for the monthly base fixed charge, and $1.44 per cubic meter for the volume rate. Ward 2 is actually serviced through the Amherstburg system, so that is not something we've embraced in updating through this study because they're charged from the town of Amherstburg directly. Ward 3 pays $21.71 a month for their base charge, and $2.20 per cubic meter for the volume charge. And Ward 4 is $20.60 for the base charge and $1.93 per cubic meter. Right now, for water customers, you have approximately 6,200 customers for residential and 406 non-residential customers, as well as 3 greenhouse customers in the wards 3-4 area. For a total of just over 6,600 total customers that you provide water service to. And then on the wastewater side, you have just over 4,700 residential and over 400 non-residential customers for 5,163 wastewater customers that you're providing service to. Going forward, as part of the analysis, what we do is we take those existing customers and we add to it based on data that we get from your planning and building department for new customers being added to the system. So for the first few years, we've looked at a lot of the planning and building permit applications in the system to start adding to the customer base that's expected over the next few years. And then for later on in the forecast period, we look to the development charge study and the growth forecast that we had identified through the DC study to add in additional customers in the future. So we're building the forecast for wards 1 and 2 from that initial 3,160 customers up to just over 3,700 customers by 2030. For wards 3 and 4, you're going from 3,448 customers up to just over 3,700 as well there. So you are seeing some significant growth over the next few years, and then it sort of averages out. We do make some assumptions when we are adding these customers in. For the first year a new customer comes on, we only assume that 50% of the volume they would generate in a year is added to the system, because some customers may come on early in the year, some mid-year, and some in the late part of, or the latter part of the year. So we always assume 50% for the first year of each new customer as part of our analysis. What that means is you're going to be growing the volume of water that you are providing from currently about 1.57 million cubic meters to just under 1.7 million cubic meters. Your average customers right now in Ward 1-2 are using about 180 cubic meters per customer annually. In wards 3 and 4, they are using significantly less on average at 145 cubic meters per customer. So again, as we add volume for new customers, we base the assumption on the same average volumes for the new customers that the existing customers use. On the wastewater side, again, we are similar. We're assuming that growth will continue on the wastewater customers. The first few years, again, is based on planning and building permit data that is in the system, and the latter years are based on averages included in the development charge study. Currently, your Ward 1 customers are 180 cubic meters average volume per year that they're being billed, 130 cubic meters in Ward 3 and 160 cubic meters. And these are average residential customers, just so you're aware. When we look at the capital infrastructure needs, they are based on your capital budget, other approved background documents, the development charge study, so any growth-related future needs has been embraced and is funded through this analysis. As well, we look at future replacement needs based on all of your asset data. And we look at basic average life cycle and when your assets are coming due over the forecast period. If those assets are coming due over the 10-year period, we add that into over and above any asset replacement that you've included in your capital budget, so that we get a more fulsome 10-year forecast of what your capital needs potential are. Look at future life cycle needs for assets that will be coming due outside of this 10-year forecast, and that gets embraced as well. When we are identifying the capital needs, obviously we look at what the need is, what the timing of that need is, and the costs associated with it. So what that translates to, if you look at your capital budget from 2020 to 2030, there is for wards 1 and 2 water, just over $12.3 million worth of capital works that are planned. Most of that is in the life cycle replacement or asset replacement area. There are some studies and a bit of growth related work identified there for the future as well. For wards 3 and 4 water, the capital forecast is looking at just over $13.2 million out to 2030 as your capital needs. And all of these costs will be reviewed annually through your budget process and adjusted for any timing that's necessary as you get out later into the forecast period. For wastewater, Ward 1, just over $2.75 million worth of capital works. Some of these works are identified through your aqua contract. Others are based on your asset management as well as future studies. For Ward 3, you're looking at just over $2.3 million of capital needs in the next 10 years. And for Ward 4, just over $4.2 million of capital works. So we've looked at a number of different things. Most of your capital forecast is going to be funded through reserves. There's only one area that we've assumed a little bit of future debt will be needed. And that may actually be mitigated later on, depending on the timing of actual projects. As well, development charges is helping to currently pay for debentures. So you've had to issue debt in the past for growth-related works, and the development charges you're collecting in is helping to pay for those annual debt payments going forward. We're not assuming any additional growth-related projects right now will be funded through development charges. Currently, just so you know, you're only collecting development charges for growth in wastewater projects. There isn't a DC for water at this point, but that is something that if there's a need for growth-related water expansion that you can look at embracing in the future in an update to the development charges study. Not a lot of grants out there these days. Obviously, any operating transfers straight to capital, has been embraced. However, most of yours transfers from operating first go to a reserve, and then the capital draws from the reserves to fund annual expenditures. What that means right now, as of December 31st, 2019, you had in your general water reserves for wards 1 and 2, 5.5 million almost, and a life cycle reserve of just over 4 million. For wards 3 and 4, you had just under 3.5 million of general water reserves and just over 5.6 million in the life cycle reserves. So those reserves are really what's paying for a lot of that capital infrastructure that's needed, that's been identified for the 10-year period. For wastewater, your Ward 1 general reserve and your development charge reserve were in deficits at the end of 2019, and your life cycle reserve was in a positive position of just over 3.6 million. For wards 3 and 4, again, you can see the numbers there. Ward 4 did have a minor deficit in the development charge reserve fund, but your other reserves were in a healthy state. As you can see, we have for water only funded from your water general reserve and your life cycle reserve for all of those capital needs over the forecast period. And for wastewater, the reserves have been used for wards 1 and 3, and you'll see just that $100,000 for ward 4 of future debt. And again, that's such a low amount that by the time you get out to the year that's needed, depending on the timing of projects actually going forward, you may actually be able to afford to pay for that without having to issue debt. But right now in the analysis, we needed to issue that little bit of debt. When we look at your assets and the life cycle contributions needed, the age of your water system does, date back to the 1950s. The wastewater systems in some areas date back to the 70s for the assets. Your total water infrastructure value is over $126 million. So that's a significant investment that's been made for your customers. And for wastewater, you've got almost $58 million worth of investments in the system. What that means and what it translates to is for every water customer, on average, there's about $19,200 that have been invested for every single water customer. For wastewater, an additional $11,200 has been invested by the municipality for those systems. So it's a significant, $32 million or $32,000 per customer is a significant investment in your systems. This gives you a breakdown of the different assets that we've identified, including your facilities, your meters and machinery and equipment, vehicles, as well as the linear water mains and your hydrants. And then on the wastewater side, for your facilities, your hydrants, vehicles, land improvements to and of course, and it says, sorry, this is wards 3 and 4, not wastewater. So you can see that for wards 1 and 2, you have $61.5 million of investment. Wards 3 and 4, you have $65 million. What's coming due based on that life cycle analysis on the age of the infrastructure is what's in the second column. And that net amount then of the 105 million is really what's going to be coming due post 2030. And so we look at that and say, how much should we invest every year? Invest it through our reserves so that when those assets start coming due in the future, we'll have enough money to pay for them without having to spike rates up and down or take on a lot of debt. So that marker, that calculation of 3.67 million is approximately what you should be investing and saving for the future every year through your reserve transfers from your operating budget. That's sort of our happy spot so that you would be fully sustainable. On the wastewater assets, again, by ward, you've got over $31 million invested for Ward 1, almost 14 million for Ward 3, and almost 13 million for Ward 4. So total wastewater, that's that $57.9 million. And again, 4.5 million or just over 4 million is coming due in the next 10 years for replacement. And then the balance, and almost $70 million, will be coming due in future years post 2030. And to invest for that, you should be looking at about $2.4 million worth of investment annually to ensure that you are fully sustainable and able to replace those assets as they come due. When we look at your water for wards 1 and 2, this is sort of a chart, and you can see there's a couple of very big spikes here. We look at your assets over 100 years and what the replacement of them are. And due to when a lot of the assets went into place, obviously there's a couple of years that out in the forecast future that will be very, very large years for replacement. Obviously, things happen, you know, if breaks happen, you may be replacing some of those earlier. When you get to some of these years, if there are, you know, if everything's functioning well, just because it says, you know, it needs to be replaced at, you know, 80 years or 100 years, if everything's functioning properly, that doesn't mean you're going to have to replace it. But this is what's monitored on an annual basis as well by staff to ensure that the assets do get replaced when they need to be. Wards 3 and 4, you can see there's a little bit more coming due just outside our 10-year forecast period. So 2034 to 2039, you start getting some more, and then out 50 to 60, there's more, and then you have that big spike again out many years from now. So we are trying to embrace your full asset replacement over time. Ward 1 for wastewater, again, just outside the forecast period, you start having quite a bit of assets coming due based on average life expectancy for your assets. And then wards 3, a little bit coming due, but most of it outside the quite outside the forecast period now and later on. And Ward 4, again, look at the big spike we have coming just outside this 10-year forecast. And that's why it's important to be starting to put away those funds on an annual basis. And this, you know, your council has embraced, you know, building those life cycle reserves for quite a few years now, in line with when the first pieces of legislation came out many years ago after Walkerton. So you're in good shape to be able to handle the capital needs coming forward, not just for this 10-year period, but for just outside of the 10-year period as well. So when we look at your operating budget, we've included inflationary factors. So for the next couple of years, we've looked at your 2021 budget and we've added for almost all expenditures 1%. Inflation, and then outside from and that should say 2024, not 34. 2024 to 30, we've added 2% annual inflation to the majority of your expenses. For things such as utilities, materials, supplies, we've actually bumped them up in the next couple years by 2% annually. And then for the latter part of the forecast by 5% annually, which is similar to what we've seen in past years prior to COVID hitting last year. And then you also, for wards 1 and 2, are purchasing water through the Union Water Board. And so we have embraced their water rates that was based on their 2018 rate study, which included rates up to 2024, and they were averaging about a 4% annual increase. So for the future years outside of their rate study, we've included that 4% inflation factor going forward as well. That's something that'll have to be monitored. And if for some reason their rates in 2025 to 30 increase more than that, that's something you'll have to reflect then, because what they're charging you is a direct expenditure for what you have to purchase. And when you think about what we were forecasting earlier, where we have new customers coming on in wards 1 and 2 for water, we're assuming that the additional volume they need, plus a little bit of a bump up for water lost along the way, is part of what your future expenditure is as well. So it's not just based on your future. We do build growth into that water purchase need from the Union Water Board. So you can see that based on your operating budget, we have capital related, which is really transfers to your general reserves and paying off any existing debt, as well as life cycle reserves. And really we're seeing more of a trend going to your life cycle reserves in the future years. And then you have your pure operating costs that are your day-to-day expenditures. So that's for Ward 1 and 2. You're going from approximately 2.6 million currently, and that's fluctuating, but you're actually going at the end of the forecast, we'll be having a little bit less. And that is indicative of the change in the capital related. You see here we've got debt dropping off, and then reserve transfers transferring down to a life cycle reserve, which is being invested for that capital replacement over the 10 years as well as into the future. For wards 3 and 4, similar, you're going from 2.6 million currently in your pure operating and capital related costs to 2.5 million in the future. Your wastewater operating, you're going from 2.6 million down to 2.2. And you can see the change there as well. Ward 3, you're going from 798,000 up to 820,000 over time. And your Ward 4 is going from 1.3 million to 1.2 million. You'll be contributing every year. What that results in for an average residential water bill. So if you're in wards 1 and 2, you'll recall we mentioned the average user is using 180 cubic meters per year. We have assumed a 2% annual increase to that monthly base charge. And then there's less than 1% increase on that volume rate against that 180 cubic meters for the first 5 years, and then 1.3% for the last 5 years of the forecast. So overall, you're ranging from 1.3 to about 1.7% increase, which is, for the most part, as you look out over the forecast period, in line with inflation or less than inflation that we've applied to all the expenditures. For wards 3 and 4, what that means is, a 2% again increase on the base charge and just over 1% on the volume charges. So an average of 1.6% annual increase in the water bill. With wards 1, you're going from what you would currently have paid back in last year in 2020 on average of just under $500 for your water use, up to $576 in 10 years. And then for wards 3 and 4, going from a bill last year on average of $473 up to $553. So that's your water users. For your wastewater bill, we've done a similar analysis. Wards 1, that average 180 cubic meters a year being used, you'd go from just over $500 last year up to $616 almost on an average annual bill. Again, with 2% increases on the base charge and then the volume charge, just over 2% for 2021, 2% for the next few years, and then slightly less than 2% for the balance of the forecast period. For wards 3, based on that average 130 cubic meters that they're charged for wastewater, you're going from about $447 for the year up to $683. There is slightly higher increases needed in this ward for the first few years, but leveling out again to around inflation of 2% annually in the latter part of the forecast period. Ward 4 wastewater customers going from about $557 up to $719 almost by 2030. Again, a little bit higher on the volume rate increases over the next few years, but averaging around 2.5% increases annually for your wastewater bill. Where you compare to other municipalities in your area, we've broken it out by ward. And for Ward 2, we have based the wastewater on Amherstburg's current rates. So this is what 2021 current rates are in other municipalities and where you rank on that. Now, I will point out that various municipalities are at various stages of asset management. And, it's hard to compare, precisely because we're not 100% sure in the other municipalities if they've embraced full cost pricing or if they're still phasing in their full cost pricing. So that's based on 180 cubic meters a year. Again, you'll also note that in some of the wards, you're using significantly less than that annually in usage. So that's the water rate study. The water rate study is then used to prepare the water financial plan, which is needed for your water licensing. And it is something that is required to be provided as part of your submission for your water license. It is required every 5 years to be provided to the province along with other documents. So Ontario Regulation 45307 requires you to provide a financial plan that represents, and it represents one of the 5 key documents that you need to get your licensing. It is to be completed and included as part of that. And it has to have at least 6 years, including the year in which it's being submitted for. So your financial plan actually has the full 10-year forecast in it, although you only needed to actually provide 6 years. So you've gone beyond what the requirements of the legislation is making you do, just because we have the rate study to base it on. Right now, because this is falling under the Safe Drinking or the Drinking Water Act, it is mandatory that you provide these financial plans for water and encouraged for wastewater, but you are not mandatorily required yet to provide a financial plan for wastewater. It's our understanding that once the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act full regulations are in place for municipalities in a couple of years, the water and wastewater legislation will be updated, which will require you to mandatorily provide the wastewater financial plan as well. But currently you only need the water plan, so that's what we've provided. So a lot of this I'll let you know, but we've talked about, but really the difference between the rate study and the financial plan is that the rate study is based on your budgeting or cash basis of accounting, where the financial plan has to be translated into a financial statement type of document, similar to what you would see in private industry. So it does embrace, everything, including your tangible capital assets, your operating and capital budgets, amortization of those assets over their lifespan. And then just so that you know, once it's passed, the resolution for council has to be submitted to the province with the financial plan. And you do have to make the financial plan available on your website or provide a hard copy free of charge to anyone who asks for a copy of it. And you do also have to advertise that it's available. So what that all means for you, again, you're required to do it for water. It's encouraged for wastewater. You do have to translate your budgeting and all your documentation into this accounting format, and you have to provide it and the approval of it through a resolution of council to the ministry. Just to kind of give you a high-level summary of what the differences are, and I won't go through all of this in detail, between a rate study on a modified cash basis and a full accrual basis. For those who are not in the accounting field, there are minor differences. So when we look at, for example, your capital requirements on your budget basis, we include things that are not just tangible capital assets, or we also include things like studies, which on an accounting base is considered an operating expense. So we have to do some adjustments between the two documents. Things like your debt, we want to make sure through your rate study that your rates are calculating enough money to pay for both principal and interest expenses. But on a financial plan, interest is considered an expense and principal is considered a debt reduction. So these are some of the things we do to translate really your budgets into accounting terminology through the water financial plan. Just to give you another sort of look, we talked earlier about the value of your assets right now, and that's always based on what your current and future values are. When we look at a financial plan and your tangible capital assets, we have to look at what your historic values are, and we amortize those and write them off over years. And as we all know, with the rates, we want to make sure that you are budgeting for and planning for what it's actually going to cost you, not what it might have cost you 10, 15, 40, 50 years ago to put assets in place. And that's a distinct difference. And you can see from this table, with your water assets, you're currently at a total tangible capital asset value of 50 million, which is significantly less than what the replacement value of those assets were in our previous slide. Just high level, and this is just one of the statements that your statement of operation, and you can see how we move from that budget or cash basis, make some adjustments, and get you to a full accrual basis for the financial plan. And I won't get into all the little details of it. Just want to demonstrate it as how we do the adjustments between the two documents. And similarly, your statement of financial position, again, we have to take what your budget and cash basis is, make some adjustments, and come up with your full accrual basis. So for this evening, obviously, council needs to consider the capital program that has been included in the rate study, and which then gets translated into the financial plan, the operating budget and program for the forecast, your proposed water and wastewater rates. You're not passing the full 10 years worth, but I believe staff are looking to have current year 2021 rates approved and put in place for the next billing cycle. And then obviously for the water financial plan, you'll want approval on that so that you can get the submission into the province to meet all those licensing requirements that are due. So that is my presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Nancy. Very well put together present. I'm going to ask council. I need a motion to accept the presentation first, and then, oh, Kevin, did you had something to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, Nancy, for the presentation. Very thorough and detailed, and really appreciated. I just wanted to say to council before we move forward that the rate study and the financial plan is required to be completed every 5 years. So this is an ongoing thing. It's evaluated annually as part of the budget process. As Nancy mentioned, the financial plan is a requirement as part of our drinking water license. The intention here tonight is really to present this report and both reports, I should say, and the presentation to council. We realize it's a lot of information, and we realize that there's a lot to it. So what the intention was for you to receive the presentation tonight, and administration will be coming forward at the next meeting with a report and a bylaw for council's consideration for adjustments to the rates, as well as the adoption for the financial plan. So this will give you some more time to digest the information that you've heard here tonight. And if you have any questions going forward, even after this meeting, anything that that you might not think of tonight that while Nancy's here, by all means, you can shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll be happy to try and answer those questions before that meeting and before that report. And with that being said, I'd like to pass it back to the mayor and see if there's any questions or if we want to move forward with receiving the presentation. So thank you for your time.
Open it up first for questions from council. Any questions at all? Councillor Guerin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Got a couple of questions to Mr. Gerard. When will that report be coming back to council? When can we expect that?
I'm working on the report now, so it should be coming for the March 1st meeting.
Okay, and then further that, I got a couple more questions, Mr. Mayor, if I could. One is on usage. I noticed on the water forecast, average cubic meters per customer, Ward 1 and 2 at 180 and Wards 3 and 4 at 145. I'm curious as to the usage, why so much in 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4. And on the wastewater forecast, Ward 1, 180, and the other wards are considerably less as well. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out what the usage difference, or why the usage difference in Ward 1 more than the other wards. And then I have another question after that, please.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. The consumption rates are averaged over the years based on the ward consumption and what's billed out. The reasoning for the differences in consumption can be various reasons: density of the amount of people living in a home. In wards 1 and 4, there may be more likeliness of people having pools as opposed to in the rural areas, which will boost up the consumption, and various things like that that really have an impact on consumption. I will say that based on the numbers that we're seeing as part of this rate study, that they're considerably lower than we've seen over the last decade, and that would be mostly related to a lot of water use education and reducing excess water, and using low flow toilets, low flow faucets, aeration and on faucets, things like that. So it's considerably less than we've seen over the last 10 years, but those would be the reasons why.
Thanks, Kevin. And then further that, Mr. Mayor, if I could, the
Yeah,
last
go
one
ahead.
on life cycle infrastructure value. So Nancy had made a point about the value of our existing water infrastructure and our wastewater infrastructure being 126.75 million and 57.93 million, and as being positive. I'm just looking to what I can gauge that against versus other municipalities, for example. Or is that average, that value? Or is it above average, below average? Does anyone have an answer for that? Thank you.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's difficult to compare one municipality to the next. They can vary differently depending on the amount of, the size of facilities, the amount of water mains, the distance to and from, treatment plants and pumping stations. It certainly is not on an average customer basis out of the norm of what we see elsewhere, with some being a little bit higher and some being lower. So it's hard when you look at total assets versus, I always like to take it down to that average investment per customer, and you are similar to a lot of other municipalities on that average.
Anybody else from council? Deputy Mayor Malash, go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship, to Nancy. Hi, Nancy. Thanks for presenting tonight. Great presentation. The usage, I just wanted to go back to the 180 and the 145, I think it was. Those numbers, they're not just a rolling 12, they're more like a rolling 24 or a rolling 36 month average. It's more than 1 year, correct?
Through you,
Or is that-
yeah, we look at 3 to 4 years worth of data.
Okay.
Averaging, because you do have years, in very wet years, people aren't watering their lawns in the summer, and usage can be down, where in dry years you're using more outdoor water use and your volumes can be up. So we always want to look at 3 to 4 years worth of data as an average for that.
Okay, thank you. One further question. The number of housing or number of customers that are being added over the next 10 years. Has anyone looked to see how significantly it would affect our rates if we weren't to hit the numbers that are suggested that we will likely hit?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we did, in working with staff, we did look at actual applications in the process for the next few years. We were looking at truly just additional residential customers. It's very difficult to make assumptions on what a new non-residential customer might use. They might be a very large water user, or they might be a small water user. So to be conservative, we haven't added in new non-residential users. So that would hopefully provide a little bit of a conservative estimate going forward, so that if you weren't hitting all of the new residential unit users, the fact that you are going to get some non-residential users in the system as well will help to hopefully mitigate over time any of those minor fluctuations. But like I said, we did look at, in the first few years, actual building permit and planning data to come up with the units that we were assuming going forward. And then when you get later out in the forecast, we look to your development charge study. And of course, you will be back every 5 years to relook at this and make adjustments where growth maybe has come even faster than anticipated here, or could slow down.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Anybody else from council? Councillor Bondi, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A great job again. This report was actually, I found it really interesting to read it, the details and the information that you can pull out of it. At one point, I was trying to count how many fire hydrants we had but then I realized they were all in different sections of the municipality, so I gave up. So if you have an easy way on your end, I would love to do a fun fact thing of how many fire hydrants we have, because you don't even think of things like that as an asset. Being a counselor, like I've never really thought of, a fire hydrant costing $4,700, and that we have to look at replacing it, and how expensive the system really is, and how detailed the system really is, right? And so in the last election, I got 4 complaints going door to door about water rates. And it was the most I got complaints about anything. We have really high water rates. So information, I know it's not your job, but information as a counselor, knowing if other municipalities are cost recovery, I'm very curious, because I did get a lot of complaints about the cost for high water rates. That being said, now I have given the report to a couple people who have complained to me, and I go, well, here's the report. It's on our agenda. Read it now and tell me your thoughts, because you really can't argue after you see it. You really can't argue against the 2%. Like it's justified when you're looking at everything. So it makes our job easy. Easier, I guess. So I appreciate that. I do think that the 140 homes in Harrow is on the is on the conservative side. Maybe I'm just an optimist hoping that we're going to get 240 or maybe 340, but I just, I want to thank you, and it was good. So I'll see you in 5 years, I guess. Thanks.
Jeff, you had something to add? Go ahead, Jeff.
Through the chair, on page 40 and 41 of the budget
Jeff.
document, it
Jeff.
has the, yeah.
Can't hear you, Jeff. Jeff, try it again.
There we go. Is that better?
That's better.
On page 40 and 41, through the chair, on page 40 and 41 of the budget document, it has the asset management snapshot, and based on the 2017 data, there are 716 hydrants. And that page 4041 has a great listing of all kinds of assets that we own.
Councillor Van Dolen, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Well, first, I want to say, Councillor Guerin, I'm really disappointed in you in that question about water usage. I mean, you're a parent. You must know there were more teenagers in Ward 1. That's why they use more water. But seriously, the question, I saw the $250,000 capital investment to cross under Highway 3, a pet wish of the mayor's, which I agree with. I'm just curious as to what capacity that line will have. I mean, there's some, the sports fields over there and some zoned industrial stuff we've been hearing about lately. I'm just wondering how many years will be good for with that $250,000 investment, how many customers, that sort of thing. And I have a couple more questions after that.
Kevin?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll answer that question. We actually put that in as a placeholder for the capital. There is intentions to bring a report, I'm hoping, to the next meeting to discuss financing that water line under the highway. We are working in conjunction with the MTO to try and get that installed, designed and installed across the highway. So I'm hoping to bring that kind of information to you for the next meeting.
Great, thank you very much. Next one is, so we should be saving 3.7 million per year to be fully sustainable for water and 2.4 million for wastewater. I looked for this number, but I couldn't find it. How much are we saving now?
Kevin, can you answer that one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll try and take that.
Go ahead, Nancy. Go ahead.
If you look at the graphs here, you can see this life cycle reserve. That and your general capital reserve, where you're actually putting money aside and investing it to pay for capital, is a component of that's really what you're doing. And you're putting an amount away and investing it every year. So you are, when we're doing our calculations, we look at how much you're going to make in, on average, investing that money for the future as well. So that plays into it. So you are putting away a good portion of that, again, we look at when each asset comes due over the future. And you are getting very close to what you're putting, what you need to be putting away. You're not there at 100% yet, but based on the timelines of when your capital is coming due in the future, you're in very good shape in building those reserves going forward to ensure that you've got that life cycle. So where you are today is kind of a little bit of a difficult thing to come out with, because you're transferring to general reserves versus specific life cycle reserves. And that's where you can see over time, we're trying to move you to putting the money into life cycle reserve transfers, where you are, they're a reserve fund and they're earning interest as you invest those monies to help you mitigate that in the future, those costs that'll be coming forward. Does that help at all? So it really differs a little bit for each system.
It's somewhat helpful. I'm reading between the lines. I'm guessing that we may be a couple $100,000 a year short of what you think is the ideal contribution.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, true, but then you also have other things that, debt, for example, as it retires, that's already built into the rate, that's additional money that you could put into reserves going forward as well. And then we do recognize that, it's based on average estimated lives that we do these calculations on. So we want to be in the magnitude of putting something away, but to be precise, again, you may have some assets that last longer than their average useful life, right? And
Okay.
balance those things out. So we always look at that calculation in the summary table as a kind of where should we be heading to? And are we in the realm of it? And as long as we're close, you're in good shape. If you were way off that mark and you were only putting, say, $500,000 away every year, then you'd be falling quite a bit short to reaching that sustainability. And I'd have concerns, and we'd be most likely identifying that you should be increasing rates by more than inflation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neal. By the way, good report. Lots of stuff to think about, chew on. And one final question. You had some projections there that most of the rate increases will be below inflation, but as we've seen what's going on with government spending in the US, Canada, and Europe, with doubling long-term debt, there's a lot of people who think that inflation, that terrible bugaboo, will be back on us shortly. And those of us who are old enough to remember inflation remember how terrible it is. So if we do re-enter a period of inflation, you said that we'll stay close to it or just below inflation. Would that remain true even if inflation takes off and becomes a problem again?
And through you,
I'm asking a lot of
through you, Mr. Mayor, obviously, if we get into, I'm old enough to remember double digits of inflation in my lifetime. And, luckily we haven't seen that in a very long time, not to say that it couldn't happen again in the future. And if it does, obviously that would affect all expenditures that you have, not just on water and wastewater. We are hoping, based on more recent trends, that won't be the case in the years to come. But absolutely, that's something that through your annual budget process, if you're seeing very large spikes in tender costs for your capital, if you're seeing, even greater than inflation factors on things like the utility costs, which is why in future years we've actually bumped them up to about, to a 5% annual increase instead of 2%. Then yes, by all means, they're going to impact your future rate projections. And that's also part of why you want to review those things as part of your budget and update this analysis every 5 years to keep in line with things that we just can't predict at this point. We haven't seen double-digit inflation in a long time, and I hope that doesn't come back anytime soon. But it's not, but you're right, it's not out of what could possibly happen. Stranger things have happened. No one could have predicted what happened, what we're going through right now with a global pandemic. And there are municipalities out there that are experiencing really weird fluctuations in their volumes because so many people are working from home and businesses are closed. Municipalities that have a lot of large industry that uses large amounts of water are significantly reduced for last year, and their residential use is up because kids are home. We're all home working from home, and our residential use is up. We looked at 2020 as part of these averages, and yes, your residential was up a bit, but we weren't assuming that was going to continue with these averages that we're forecasting going forward. So again, this continues this year a little longer than we'd all like it to. Chances are that residential average will be slightly higher than what the norm is on average. And your non-residential may be lower again this year than what the norm is for that. But we're hoping that over this year that fluctuates and kind of returns to a bit more of a normal.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anybody else from council? So once again, Nancy, I want to thank you for the presentation. It was well put together.
You're welcome.
So at this point, I'll need a motion to receive the presentation, please, from council. Councillor Bowman and Councillor Bjorkman, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, council, and thank you, Nancy, once again.
Thank you.
So at this point here, I'll need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Verbeek and Councillor Van den Dolen, we'll see you at 6 o'clock at the regular count. Thank you.